USA crowds didn't respect the Beatles until their second song made them legends. New York City, February 12, 1964. Carnegie Hall, where classical music legends perform, where opera stars make their American debuts, where tonight, four boys from Liverpool are about to face the most skeptical audience of their lives. John Lennon stands backstage. His hands are shaking, not from excitement, from something darker, the weight of expectation. Because Carnegie Hall isn't just any venue, it's sacred ground, where Tchaikovsky conducted, where Judy Garland triumphed, where serious musicians prove themselves. And tonight the Beatles have to convince an audience that doesn't think rock and roll belongs here. The crowd filing into their seats isn't screaming teenage girls, it's New York's cultural elite, music critics with notepads, classical musicians with folded arms, jazz aficionados ready to dismiss these British boys as a passing fad. "This is mental," George Harrison says, looking through a crack in the curtain. "Half of them look like they're at a funeral." He's not wrong. The audience is dressed formally, sitting stiffly in their seats, talking quietly, among themselves, with the air of people who have come, not to celebrate, but to evaluate. The New York Times had run an editorial that morning. "The Beatles at Carnegie Hall. Has American music fallen so low?" Radio stations had debated whether rock and roll should be allowed in such a prestigious venue, and music professors had written letters calling the booking a disgrace to American culture. Paul McCartney tries to stay positive. "We've faced tough crowds before," he says. "We'll win them over." But John Lennon isn't so sure, because this isn't just about music. This is about respect, about proving that rock and roll isn't just noise for teenagers, but real art, real music, real emotion. What none of them know yet, what nobody in that skeptical audience knows, is that in 15 minutes, everything will change. One song, one moment, one decision will transform Carnegie Hall from a temple of classical music into the birthplace of a revolution. The lights go down, the audience applauds politely, not enthusiastically, just politely. The Beatles walk onto the stage. John, Paul, George, and Ringo, four boys from Liverpool, standing where Beethoven's music once echoed. The contrast is jarring. Their matching suits seem too casual. Their hair seems too long. Their instruments seem too electric for this hallowed space. "Good evening, New York," Paul says brightly, trying to inject energy into the room. The response is tepid, scattered applause. A few teenage girls in the balcony scream, but they're quickly shushed by the adults around them. John steps to his microphone. "We're the Beatles from Liverpool, and we're honored to be here at Carnegie Hall." More polite applause, but you can feel the skepticism, the judgment, the waiting for them to fail. They launch into "Roll Over Beethoven," a Chuck Berry cover, fast, energetic, designed to get crowds moving. But the Carnegie Hall audience doesn't move. They sit with arms crossed, faces neutral, watching with the detachment of scientists observing an experiment. The acoustics in Carnegie Hall are perfect for classical music, but for rock and roll, the sound is too clean, too refined. It strips away the rawness. That makes rock and roll powerful. What comes through sounds almost sterile, like the Beatles are playing in a museum, not a concert hall. John can feel it. The energy is all wrong. The connection isn't there. When "Roll Over Beethoven" ends, the applause is polite, nothing more. A few people in the audience actually look at their watches, as if checking how much longer they have to endure this. Paul looks at John, George looks at Ringo, and they all understand. They're losing the room. "Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like. That helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John Lennon walks to the microphone, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the skeptical audience. He can see them, the critics with their pens ready, the musicians with their superior smiles, the cultural gatekeepers, waiting to write them off. And something inside John snaps, not into anger but into clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," John says, his Liverpool accent thick and unapologetic, "I can see that some of you aren't quite sure what to make of us." The audience shifts uncomfortably, not used to being addressed so directly. You're sitting there thinking, what are these British boys doing? In Carnegie Hall, this is a place for real music, real art. The room goes completely silent. This isn't what they expected. "Well, I want to tell you something," John continues. "You're right. This is a place for real music, real art, real emotion. And that's exactly what we're going to give you." John turns to the band. "Boys, forget the set list. We're doing something different." Paul looks confused. "John, what are you?" "Trust me," John says, then back to the audience. "This next song," John says, "isn't one of our hits. It's not what you've heard on the radio. It's something we wrote. About loss, about pain, about being human." Audience leans forward slightly, curious now, despite themselves. "It's called In My Life," John says, though the song wouldn't be officially released until the following year. The Beatles had been working on it, and tonight John decides. Carnegie Hall needs to hear it. What happens next will be talked about for decades. John sits at the piano, not his usual guitar, the piano, and he begins to play, softly, gently, with a tenderness that nobody expected. "There are places I remember, all my life, though some have changed." His voice is different now, not the rock and roll shout, but something quieter, more vulnerable, more honest. "Some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain." The Carnegie Hall audience, who came expecting noise, are hearing poetry. Paul's bass comes in, subtle, supportive. George's guitar adds texture. Ringo's drums are gentle, like a heartbeat. All these places have their moments. With lovers and friends I still can recall. And something magical happens. The skeptical audience begins to listen, really listen. Some are dead and some are living. In my life I've loved them all. The words hit differently in this space, where so much history lives, where so many legends performed, because the Beatles aren't just singing. They're confessing. They're sharing something real, something raw, something that transcends genre, generation, geography. By the time they reach the bridge, you can see it happening in the audience. The crossed arms are uncrossing. The stern faces are softening. The critics are putting down their pens and just listening, because what the Beatles are playing isn't just rock and roll. It's music. Real music with melody and harmony and emotion that speaks to something universal. But of all these friends and lovers, there is no one compares with you. John's voice cracks slightly. On that line, not from a mistake, but from genuine emotion, and the audience feels it, and these memories lose their meaning. "When I think of love as something new," the song builds, not with volume, but with intensity, with feeling. "Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before." Paul's harmonies blend perfectly with John's lead vocal, creating something beautiful, something that proves they're not just a pop group, they're musicians, real musicians. "I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life I love you more." When the song ends, there's a moment of complete silence, one heartbeat, two, three. Then the applause starts, but it's different now, not polite, not obligatory, but genuine, respectful, appreciative, the kind of applause that Carnegie Hall reserves for real artists. John looks out at the audience and sees something that wasn't there before. Respect, a music critic in the third row, who came ready to write a scathing review, is wiping tears from his eyes. A classical violinist in the balcony, who dismissed the Beatles as noise, is nodding slowly, understanding something she didn't expect to understand. And in the back row, an elderly couple, who came because their granddaughter begged them, are holding hands, transported by the music to their own memories, their own lost loves. John doesn't give them time to retreat back into skepticism. He launches immediately into the rest of the set, but everything is different now. The energy has shifted. They play And I Love Her, another ballad, another showcase of their musicianship, their songwriting, their ability to create real art. Paul's bass line is melodic, almost classical in its construction. George's guitar solo is tasteful, restrained, beautiful. The Carnegie Hall audience, trained to appreciate technical excellence, can't help but recognize what they're hearing. These aren't just four boys making noise. These are craftsmen who understand music theory, who can write melodies that rival anything in the classical canon. And I Love Her ends to thunderous applause, real applause, the kind that says, "We were wrong about you." They play this boy a cappella harmonies that showcase their voices without any instruments to hide behind. Three-part harmony, so tight, so perfect that it sounds like one voice split into three parts. The music professors in the audience are leaning forward now, analyzing the chord progressions, the voice leading, the harmonic structure, and realizing these boys from Liverpool know exactly what they're doing. By the time they get to "I Want to Hold Your Hand," the song that brought them to America, the Carnegie Hall audience is on their feet, not just the teenagers, everyone, the critics, the musicians, the cultural elite, all standing, all applauding, all celebrating. Because the Beatles have done what nobody thought possible. They've brought rock and roll to Carnegie Hall and made it belong after the concert. Backstage at Carnegie Hall, the Beatles are surrounded not by screaming fans, but by the very people who came to dismiss them. Leonard Bernstein, the legendary conductor, pushes his way through to shake their hands. "Gentlemen," Bernstein says, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "That was extraordinary, truly extraordinary." John, still in shock from the audience's transformation, can barely respond. "You thought we'd be rubbish," John says, half joking, half serious. "I thought you'd be noise," Bernstein admits. "Instead, you were music, real music." "That song, In My Life," Bernstein continues, "that's a composition, not just a pop song, a real composition with structure and meaning and emotional depth." Paul beams. George looks stunned. Ringo just grins. But it's John who speaks. "We're just four lads from Liverpool who love music, all kinds of music. And that's exactly why you succeeded tonight," Bernstein says. "Because you understand that music is music, whether it's played on a harpsichord or an electric guitar." The New York Times critic who wrote the scathing editorial approaches next. "Mr. Lennon," he says, "I owe you an apology." John looks at him, waiting. "I came here tonight, ready to write about the death of American culture. Instead, I witnessed the birth of something new, something important. You've proven that rock and roll isn't just teenage rebellion. It's a legitimate art form with real emotional power." The critic extends his hand. "Thank you for proving me wrong." John shakes it. "Thank you for listening." The reviews came out the next day and they were unanimous. The Beatles conquer Carnegie Hall. Rock and roll earns respect. British boys prove music has no boundaries. But the real impact wasn't in the reviews, it was in what happened next. Carnegie Hall, which had never booked a rock and roll act before, began opening its doors to other rock musicians. The cultural gatekeepers who had dismissed an entire genre began taking it seriously. Music schools started teaching Beatles songs, analyzing their harmonies, their chord progressions, their songwriting techniques, and most importantly, young musicians everywhere realized something profound, that you don't have to choose between being popular and being respected, that you can make music that speaks to teenagers and also earns the admiration of classical musicians, that art and commerce don't have to be enemies. Paul McCartney years later said, "Carnegie Hall was the night we stopped being just a pop group and became musicians, real musicians, not because we changed, but because we finally had an audience that listened, really listened." John Lennon, before his death, said, "That night taught me That respect isn't given, it's earned, and you earn it, not by trying to be what people expect, but by being honest, being vulnerable, being real, George Harrison said. Carnegie Hall proved that music is universal, that if you play from the heart, people will respond, no matter what genre, no matter what venue. Ringo Starr said simply, that was the night. America stopped laughing at us and started listening to us. The bootleg recordings from that Carnegie Hall concert are some of the most treasured Beatles recordings in existence, not because of the music, though the music is incredible, but because you can hear the transformation. You can hear the polite applause at the beginning turn into genuine enthusiasm by the end. You can hear skepticism transform into respect. Today, Carnegie Hall has a plaque commemorating that night. On this stage, February 12, 1964, the Beatles proved that rock and roll belongs in the halls of musical greatness. Music historians consider the Carnegie Hall concert more important than Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan introduced the Beatles to America, but Carnegie Hall legitimized them. The story of the Beatles at Carnegie Hall reminds us that respect comes from authenticity, from being brave enough to be vulnerable, to share something real, to trust that quality will be recognized. The Beatles could have played it safe that night, could have stuck to their upbeat hits, could have tried to win over the skeptical audience with energy and showmanship. Instead, they chose honesty. They chose vulnerability. They chose to share something real. And in doing so, they didn't just win over one skeptical audience. They changed how an entire culture viewed rock and roll. USA crowds didn't respect the Beatles. They came to Carnegie Hall ready to dismiss them, ready to confirm their prejudices. But then came the second song, In My Life, a moment of pure honesty, pure vulnerability, pure art, and everything changed. The skeptics became believers, the critics became fans, the gatekeepers became allies, because the Beatles proved that night what real artists know, that the best way to earn respect isn't to demand it or to chase it, it's to be so honest, so vulnerable, so real, that people can't help but recognize the truth in what you're doing. That's the legacy of February 12, 1964, the night the Beatles walked into Carnegie Hall as a pop group and walked out as legends. USA crowds didn't respect the Beatles. They came to Carnegie Hall with folded arms and skeptical minds, ready to dismiss these British boys as just another fad. But then came the second song, In My Life, a moment of pure vulnerability, pure honesty, pure art, and everything changed. The skeptics became believers. The critics became fans. The gatekeepers opened the doors, because the Beatles proved that night what real artists know. That respect isn't demanded, it's earned through honesty, through vulnerability, through music that speaks to the soul. They didn't just perform that night, they transformed not just the audience, but the entire cultural landscape, and reminded us all that real art always finds its audience, always earns its respect, always changes everything.